Welcome to part one of the lecture on chapter two, formulating a research question. So one of the first things that I want to talk about in the context of formulating a research question is how you decide what your research topic will be, because all of us research different things, we're fascinated by different things, and because of that, we really have to talk about how you establish your research topic. And really, there are sort of two different ways that we can find our research topic, and each of those varies on the type of research that we want to do. And we call these two different types of research topics fundamental and applied research topics. Fundamental research is the research that's looking at our world at large and tries to generate new ideas or an explanation about how the world works, why, so on and so forth. But it doesn't necessarily always have an application every day in the immediate sense. So, an example of this might be if one of us were trying to explain who is most likely to attempt suicide one time in their life. We're just trying to generate new ideas to explain why this happens. There might not necessarily be an application in our everyday life, but we're just trying to understand what happens. Applied research, on the other hand, is the research that seeks to solve a very specific societal problem and to uncover more information about a particular issue. Applied research has direct implications in practice. So, using our example that we were just working with, someone doing applied research might be specifically developing and testing the effectiveness of a specific program aimed at preventing suicide attempts amongst at-risk adolescents. So, fundamental research is all about exploring and explaining something that's going on, and applied research is all about how can we solve a problem or get more information about a very particular issue that will solve some sort of issue. There's some direct application to it. Within the selection of research, even just talking about fundamental versus applied research is still pretty broad. So we like to narrow down our research topics, and there are two specific ways that we talk about narrowing down our research topics. The first of those is actually both of them are constructs and populations of interest. So I want to talk about these a little bit more in detail, but I want to start by talking about a construct. Because a construct, by definition, is a concept that is possible to measure in a form. So, a construct is this broad topic of our world that we are trying to understand. And in some way, there is a way for us to measure it. A good example of a construct might be self esteem, or love, or intelligence. We all have a pretty good idea, or maybe even a thought about what those concepts are as constructs, but the way that we measure them might be different. The way that I measure intelligence might be different than the way that you measure intelligence. Maybe I'm measuring intelligence by having someone take a specific intelligence test that gives me an intelligence quotient. Someone else might say, oh, intelligence is how well you do in school, your GPA, your grades. Similarly, love can be defined in different ways and measured in different ways. So the way that I measure love and sort of understand it in my brain is different than the way that you might understand love. And by those definitions, because these concepts are things that can be interpreted in different ways, we would call them constructs. And once you've established a construct, simply labeling it is still really broad. So, in order for you to narrow down your research topic, we talk about taking a construct and using a funnel approach, starting very broad and narrowing your way down to a research topic. You start with a construct and then you add in these other components, including your population of interest. So, a good example is if we have a researcher who wants to know what wealth is, their construct is wealth. And in this construct, it can be really difficult to define and measure what wealth is. So, a researcher is going to start very broad and they're going to ask themselves what different aspects that people use to define wealth, which can include things like someone's gender, how much money they make, what their employment status is, how much education they have, equality, background, where they're located. All of these components can go into the construct that is wealth. And that's really broad. So a researcher will then narrow it down and say, okay, if these are all of the ways that wealth can be defined, I'm going to find a specific type of construct within wealth that makes sense to me. And maybe this researcher narrows down by saying, I am going to look at wealth as defined by the amount of money that someone makes, and that's how I'm going to define it. That's how I'm going to measure it. Someone's annual income. From there, the researcher then starts to narrow down even further by asking themselves, okay, what's the specific population that I want to look at? Do I want to look at all men? Do I want to look at women? Do I want to look at non-binary folks? Do I want to go all the way across the United States? Do I want to go all across the world? Do I want to focus on a specific place? So maybe this researcher narrows down and says a specific population is that I want to look at adults working in the healthcare industry. And from there, you just narrow down even further so that you get your research topic. And in this example, maybe the researcher narrows down to the fullest as I'm going to look at adults between the ages of 40 and 60 who work in the UC health system, and I'm going to look at the ways that their wealth, as defined by their annual salary, varies across someone's gender identity. And that's how you conceptually narrow down your research topic and select a research topic to you. You start really broad and you work your way down to a narrow window using that funnel, identifying your constructs and identifying your population of interest. And that's how you'll help to narrow down your research topic. So we've been talking about this in the context of this example, but there are a couple of terms that might help in narrowing down this research process. And really, when we talk about that, we're talking about how we operationalize a construct. So operationalization of a construct is where we turn a construct into an actual variable that we can measure. Operationalization is nothing more than our ability to transform constructs into measurable pieces. The best researchers are the ones who are able to measure all of the characteristics of a construct. Once a construct is operationalized, we have what's called a variable. So a variable is a very specific feature or aspect of a construct that we can measure that might mean something different for each participant in the study. And I'm going to go through an example of this, but I want to just present that a variable is that small piece of a construct that we can measure. And we also have what we call conceptualization. And conceptualization is the process that we use to break down a construct into smaller pieces and clarifying to know the precise meaning of each of those pieces. So I want to go through this again, but I actually want to go through it in reverse through an example. So say we have a construct. Our construct is the love for writing. It's something that is difficult to identify. It can be hard to define what the love for writing is, and the way that we can break that down into research is to operationalize it. So we start by operationalizing this construct of love for writing by conceptualizing the different components of this. And in this example, we have two components of the conceptualization. we have love, and we have writing. So in this example, I'm only going to operationalize one side of this argument, and I encourage y'all to practice operationalizing love through the same process. So we have this concept, we have this construct, the love for writing, which is conceptualized to have two aspects, love and writing. And if we look at writing, we can operationalize writing by breaking it down into smaller pieces or variables and clarifying what each of those variables is so that it has a precise meaning. Those aspects of our variables could mean something different to each participant, but we still practice breaking it down. So in this example, we might operationalize our construct of writing by saying that writing includes someone's reading habits, someone's writing habits, their exposure to art, their parents and their background. We could even say that maybe their education falls under this operationalization of writing. And I say this as being a variable because it can be interpreted by different people in different ways. So maybe one participant on our study says that being exposed to art is seeing billboards while they're driving down the road because that's a form of art. And another person in the same study might say that their exposure to art only counts if they're going to a museum and they're seeing art. So from this example, you see how conceptualization of our construct is the first step that we take toward operationalizing them. Oh my goodness, this word keeps getting me. I'm so sorry, y'all. Operationalization applies to the concrete measurable variables of one specific construct, whereas conceptualization applies to the breakdown of constructs into smaller pieces. So once we have those smaller pieces, we can then operationalize them to turn them into specific variables. So we did this on one aspect of this construct, the writing component. I encourage y'all to take a break and to practice this operationalization on the love aspect of this construct. And when you come back, we will jump into the second part of our lecture on chapter 2.